I've been working on this new book, First Principles of Scrum, to try to answer a lot of Scrum questions, and I've been using AI to do it. Chat 3.5 was pretty useless, but Chat 4 started to become useful. And now Chat 4.0 is actually 10 times better, so it's getting really useful. And it was an attempt to go back to the fundamental principles behind Scrum because people ask me all these questions. Why do we have to have autonomous teams? Why does Scrum do this? Why does Scrum do that? It has nothing to do with Scrum. It has to do with fundamental principles in physics, biology, neuroscience, and so forth. And my training is as a radiation physicist and professor of radiology. That's my formal training. I have never been to a project management training ever. But based on my training as a radiologist and doing supercomputer modeling of the human cell for decades and understanding complex systems, I was pulled into a big bank that was failing every major project. And I said, you do something completely different if you want to deliver. So I wanted to go back to my original training. I am managing a $50 million venture fund. So that fund is actually helping to fund this effort. And I'm also running a healthcare company. So a lot of what I'm doing is taking Scrum and focusing it on improving health and performance. And you see some of this embedded in all of this. At the end of the day, this is just the outline of the talk. There are really 7 layers that emerge one from the other that wind up with the Agile Manifesto at the top, right? It starts with physics. Out of physics comes chemistry. Out of chemistry comes biology. Out of biology comes the brain and neuroscience and evolution. And as we started to simulate evolution, the whole massive theory, thousands of books and probably millions of publications on complex adaptive systems emerged. And Scrum is directly based on that. And now, as we get bigger and bigger Scrum teams, how to integrate multiple teams across large organizations become critical. And then out of Scrum and extreme programming, because those were really the only 2 widely deployed processes at the Agile Manifesto meeting, out of Scrum and XP emerged the values of the Agile Manifesto and the principles behind it. Okay. So I wanted to go back to the beginning. And the most fascinating thing that's happened in physics in the last 20 years to me is Wolfram's physics project. Wolfram was a professor of physics at Caltech. He studied under Feynman. He's a brilliant guy. He left Caltech as a professor because he got bored and started a company originally called Mathematica and built the world's best simulation program for physicists and mathematicians. And because he's a theoretical physicist, he gathered a bunch of theoretical physicists in his company. And he said, let's use our simulations to simulate the universe and see what we find out. What they find is that at a lower level, simple rules are generating very complex phenomenon. And it is so complex that even simple things like trying to determine when a project would be done requires infinite computer power if you simulate it at the base of what's actually going on. So this principle of computational irreducibility says you can't predict everything. You have to inspect and adapt. And that's why when you get into biological systems, they're all inspecting and adapting. Okay. So Agile is like fundamental to the way the universe works. It's like gravity. And there's a lot of people running around saying Agile is dead. What they don't realize is that gravity is still going to be there when they're dead. And Agile will still be there. They're gone as well. Wolfram says that what they're seeing is that physics, as we know it in the sense of relativity, quantum mechanics, Newton's laws, they are averages of much more complex behaviors that are particular to a human observing a very narrow segment of what's going on. And those averages, called quantum mechanics, relativity, and Newton mechanics, they actually emerge out of more deeper principles that they're simulating in their programming. And I'll just take Newton's laws for a minute because these laws apply directly to us and even personally, because people have often complained, Jeff, you shouldn't talk about twice the work in half the time. Our book, Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time, because that's not what Agile is about, going faster. We have all these Agile transformations going on in the world, and we're trying to make organizations go faster because if they don't, they're going to be out of business. It's the same thing in biological evolution. If you cannot adapt more quickly than your competition, then you're dead. The same thing happens to companies. In order to move an organization, it's a big mass, and we want to accelerate it. And that means you have to have a lot of force, because force equals mass times acceleration, right? So when we say twice the work in half the time, the formula for work is force times distance. So pushing over a distance is what generates work. And if one twice the work in half the time, work over time is power. So you have to have 4 times the power. So just as in a physical system, as an Agile coach, trainer, or Scrum Master, you need, through personal power and persuasion, move that organization. And that requires a persistent application of force over an extended period of time. Now, with the latest technology, wearable devices today, we can actually measure your capability to execute. How much energy do you have? Garmin bought a company in Finland called Firstbeat that trains Olympic teams. They have at least 7 countries. Olympic teams are trained by Firstbeat Analytics, and they're on the watch. And the ability to perform is depending on your energy state. So you can see in this watch, this is a time when my energy state was super high and sustained at a super high level. And the histogram at the bottom is stress. And in this case, I had the stress way down at a very low level. So your ability to perform is directly proportional to your energy divided by the stress, okay? So an Olympic jumper going over that high bar wants to do it with maximum force applied in exactly the right way, but with minimum friction, minimum resistance. And so you'll see that typically when they win Olympic medals, it looks easy. They make it look easy because all the friction, all the impediments are removed from their performance. So in the teams I'm working with now, I'm saying, hey, in a retrospective, let's all show our watch, because really nothing else matters, right? We can talk all day about what's good, what's bad, what's indifferent. But if you as an individual don't have very high energy with very low stress, that is going to block the team. So physics not only drives evolution, but the latest thinking, neuroscience, about how the brain works is a model called Friston's free energy model of the brain. And that model is a mathematical model that's used in autonomous robots. So it's not just a theory, it's not just an idea, it's actually a practical implementation. And what Friston points out is that the brain is a predictive engine, and anytime the brain fails in its prediction, it has to do a reset. And that reset has a cost, and you can measure it on a robot. They have a term for it called Bayesian surprise. Now, it turns out Many years ago, when we wrote the patterns book, it turns out that the most important pattern, in my view, in that book is teams that finish early accelerate faster. Why is that? Because in a venture group I worked with, we got data on thousands of sprints from dozens of companies, and we found the only data point that distinguished between high performing teams and average or poor performing teams. There was only one data point that made a difference: finishing a sprint early. Now, as we understand the neuroscience, what happens if you don't finish what you planned in a sprint, then you have a lot of explaining to do at the sprint review. And sometimes it's painful. Customers are unhappy, management's unhappy, developers are depressed, more reports, more meetings. That energy uses up all the energy that should be available for innovation and continuous improvement. But if you finish the sprint early, then you get not only that energy that now can be applied to improvement, but in the teams I'm working with every day, I work with 2 Scrum teams every day, different companies that I'm working with running. They get a dopamine rush when they finish early. That team gets high on finishing early. They're excited. They have more power to do more faster. Okay. So what we're finding is we need to understand the neuroscience behind Scrum to be effective trainers and Scrum masters, right? The great coaches all knew this instinctively, but it's hard to train someone who doesn't instinctively know how to be a great coach, but they can be trained by helping them understand the neuroscience effect that go on in the individual and in the team. And all of this is coming out in the book because of the constant dialogue and interaction with the AI, who have a massive amount of data to draw from. Now, as we look with biological evolution and we go into the simulations of biology on the computer, we find that in places like Los Alamos Labs, when I was a professor of radiology, I used to go to Los Alamos Labs to present papers. And there they were working on modeling artificial life. And Christopher Langdon, the guy that I think invented the term artificial life, proved a theorem that had a significant impact on me and the introduction of Scrum. He proved a theorem that systems evolve faster on the computer, biological systems that are being simulated, if the degrees of freedom are maximized all the way up to the edge of chaos. And when I first read that theorem, I was running this really big banking project with hundreds of developers that was years late. It's my job to fix it. And as soon as I read that theorem, I said, that is why the bank is always late. They have too many rules, too many procedures, too many reports, too many meetings. The degrees of freedom are crushing them. We have to unleash the teams and move them to the edge of chaos to move quickly. And it was out of that kind of thinking that Scrum emerged. Okay. We need to empower those teams to think for themselves and act independently. They need to self-manage. Their leader cannot be ordering them around, or we will not have maximum degrees of freedom. We will not have maximum performance. So the leader has to be a servant leader. Sustainable pace is another important phenomenon. Teams that finish early accelerate faster, but they can only do that if they're running at a very high sustainable pace. So Scrum is, I'm starting to really emphasize, depending on which survey you read, 58% to 68% of agile teams are late, over budget, with unhappy customers. And that is because not implementing Scrum, the hyperproductive pattern language, which was the second paper written on Scrum by Mike Beadle, Ken and I, and a whole bunch of other guys. They're implementing something that has nothing to do with the Scrum hyperproductive pattern language. And that is why they're failing. And people are saying Agile is dead. And what they mean is those 58 to 68% of teams that claim to be implementing Scrum, but are not implementing the pattern language, they are going to be dead because they're going to be unemployed. And that is the message about AI that I'm going to launch into in the next slide. Last year, companies, some of our customers at Scrum Inc., they laid people off by 10,000 people at a time. And we've done a detailed analysis. Who are those people? It turns out that on the average, for every company that lays off another 10,000 people, about 15% of them are Agile people, Scrum masters, Agile coaches, and so forth. And at Microsoft, who is really gets AI, they laid off 12% of the entire company last year. And then they hired 80% of the back, but only people who could implement AI. Because, hey, if you're a developer using Copilot, it implements 80% of your code. That means you're 5 times faster than a guy that's not using Copilot. So what does a Microsoft manager do? Only the teams that are using Copilot are going to stay at Microsoft. The other teams are laid off. That's what's going on, right? And that was last year. AI is improving 10x every 6 months. Moore's law only got 2x every 18 months. So AI is going 500 times faster than Moore's law. So that means by 2030, industry analysts are projecting teams will be 30 to 100 times faster. So what I'm saying right now is that we need to tune up the Scrum so that it's at least 30 times faster, or that team will be laid off. So how are we going to do that? I started in AI back in 1970. I was at Stanford, and about a third of my courses I was getting a degree to go be a professor of mathematics at the Air Force Academy, but a third of my courses were I could select. They were elective, and all of it was done in the AI lab at Stanford. The guy running SAIL was a guy named McCarthy. He invented Lisp, and I was running gaming programs that would compete with one another. So I really understand this whole thing about how do you build a world chess champion on a computer, which happened some years ago. And then all the chess experts, they were depressed, right? It's over. Computers taken over. But then a year later, a team of humans with AI on their laptops, they became the world champion chess master. And the same thing happened a few years later with Go, which is even more complex game. The computer became the Go chess champion. A year later, a human team with AI on the laptops takes the championship away from the computer. So that is the model that we need to have in our heads, that collaboration that takes a Scrum team to a much higher level, because the teams that won the World Chess Champion and the World Go Championship said 3 things. It's the process, it's the AI tools, and it's the collaboration among the team members. Sounds a lot like Agile to me. Now, I have worked with the AI now for 2 years, debating on what's going to happen. And Chad is agreeing with me now that there will be teams that will be 30 to 100 times faster, and that with minor tuning, Scrum at scale will be the leading process for enabling those teams at scale to run organizations. So then the question is, how are we going to take the teams there? Step by step, how are we going to take Scrum to where it needs to be? In addition to working at SAIL as a graduate student, over the next years, as I first went to the Air Force Academy, then I was in the medical school for 10 or 15 years, or actually I was Before I even got to Stanford, I was in the military for 10 or 15 years as a fighter pilot. Then I wind up as a fighter pilot. They send me to the Air Force Academy. Then I leave there and I take on a big grant, about a $30 million grant from the National Cancer Institute. I run that for 10 or 15 years, doing supercomputing modeling of the human cell. Then I leave there to go into industry, starting with the banks, but then I'm pulled into about 11 different companies, all running with either prototypes of Scrum or with Scrum later as Ken and I formalized it. And two of those companies were AI companies, building AI databases in Lisp. And one of them was Object Databases in Cambridge. And in 1990, I was the president of that company. It was right down the street from the MIT AI lab. And a team at the AI walked down the street to my office and they said, "Jeff, we need space. We're going to start a company called iRobot. We have these working autonomous robots and you have lab space. Will you rent us some of your space?" And I said, "Sure, great. We're an AI company. You're an AI company." So for 2 or 3 years, I had these autonomous robots running in and out of my office, trying to hunt me down. They had infrared heat-seeking sensors on them. And Professor Brooks was a senior professor at MIT, been there for 30 years, building intelligent systems. He was a co-founder. So he would come by at happy hour on Fridays. And I remember vividly one happy hour. I said, "Professor Brooks, these robots have simple rules. Every leg has a chip that knows how to move a leg. Spine has a chip that can coordinate legs. Head has a neural network that figures out what to do. And every time you turn the robot on, it learns how to walk for the first time. And in only a couple of minutes, it's running around the room without bumping into anything. And it even runs to the edge of the stairs and it won't fall down the stairs. That's amazing." I said, "I bet if we gave some simple rules to a software development team, they could boot up into a super productive team in a week. Do you think that's possible, Professor Brooks?" And he said, "I don't know, but I think you should try it." So I did. It's called Scrum. So Scrum has strong roots in AI and it understands the subsumption architecture of the autonomous robots. So let's look at every role in Scrum, every event in Scrum, every artifact in Scrum, and figure out how to push any work that we can push down to the AI. Let's do that. There are many things. The subsumption architecture is a layered control system. Okay, so the higher level controls subsume the lower levels, and you give the lower levels autonomy to do what they do. And they have APIs that communicate through the levels. And in the world of AI, those APIs are prompts. It's a prompt engineering system. And it's behavior-based control. The system behaves as a whole, and the hierarchy of controls, just like your human body, figures out what to do. And if you start to run out of oxygen, your heart automatically beats faster, right? You didn't tell it to do that. It knows to do that, right? It has a service level architecture that automatically kicks in. And the other thing about the robot is that all information is real-time information from sensors. Before you turn on the robot, there is no data in the robot. It's running constantly off data streaming in, okay? So this reactive planning model is really the way Scrum is designed. We're constantly looking at the information coming in, we're constantly inspecting, we're constantly adapting to that. So if you look at what the Scrum Master has to do, a lot of what the Scrum Master does can be subsumed by AI. All the administrative work the Scrum Master does can be subsumed by AI. We got a lot of Scrum Masters that used to take notes in meetings, right? Hey, Otter AI does a much better job. And not only that, my Scrum team take the Otter AI transcripts and they put them a GPT we created for Scrum. so that the AI knows everything we're doing. We give it all the honest transcripts, we give it all the Jira data, and now the AI becomes a member of the team, and it is an awesome assist to the product owner. We had this project last year, which is one of those projects where you think it's gonna be done next week, and then, oh, it'll take 2 more weeks, and then at the end of 2 more weeks, it's gonna take 2 more weeks, and it's never ending. Many of you have probably been on these projects, right? It's just you could never close it, and it was 3 months late, and so I put all the data into our Scrum GPT up to the point we started the project, and I said to the AI team member, "When is this gonna be done?" And it nailed it within 3 days. So our human product owner was off by 3 months, chat was off by 3 days. That tells me that chat is an order of magnitude better at predicting dates than a human, right? So I said to my Scrum team, "We're never gonna predict dates anymore. The AI member of the team one that's gonna predict the dates because they're 10 times more accurate. It'd be foolish us. We have other stuff we need to do other than giving bad dates."
That's awesome.
And the same thing for the developer. Okay, we already talked about Copilot. If you're not using AI as a developer now, you need to start reskilling if you expect to keep a job. Okay. I'm back coding now myself. I used to be a developer, but for some years I'm out doing Scrum training all the time. I had no time. Now I down in an hour, I can get the AI to generate a new tool for my company, no problem, in any language. I never programmed anything in I programmed in 10, 20 languages, but I never programmed anything in Python, but the AI likes Python. So we're doing everything in Python now. So let me give you a specific example because this is a really good one. And my global Scrum team that manages all the websites for companies, I had them take the issue of sprint planning and estimation and say, let's get chat to do all the dirty work. And what do you have to do for sprint planning? You need to select the top of the backlog, right? And the AI can do that. Then you need to make sure those stories are ready. They need to be clear. They need to be estimated. They may need to be broken down into smaller stories. You need acceptance tests. You need to make sure it's going to be the definition of done. It turns out the AI could do all that really well and 100 times faster than a person, but only if you build a GPT with Scrum, the art of doing twice the work and half the time in it, because chat doesn't understand how to do Scrum. Chat is trained on the internet. And remember, 58 to 68% of the teams on the internet are late over budget with unhappy customers. So chat has a bunch of nonsense in its training, and we couldn't get it to work until we put the red book in it. And then, bang, the first time it knew what to do. It knew how to take the right, use yesterday's weather to take the right amount of stories into the sprint. It knew how to create a buffer. So we had any interruptions, we could handle the interruptions. It knew how to set up the team for finish early, all the patterns surrounding that. It knew everything, how to run a good Scrum. And what it does is it takes away 90% of the effort that the team had to spend on sprint planning. And we're going to take away 90% of the effort that the team spends on coding. And if you're not coding, but you're doing something else with Scrum, if you're in marketing, we're going to take away 90% of the work you have to do to get good marketing content out there. And we're going to systematically do that for every piece of Scrum. We're going to organize it in a subsumption architecture, like the autonomous robots. We're going to set up Scrum teams, just like those teams that won the world champion chess tournament and the world chess champion Go tournament, where the process, the tools with AI and the laptop, and the interactions of the team, basically the Agile manifesto, is wrapped around that AI. That is going to make the winning teams of the future.
You use was a great example with the lack of friction, with a high jumper and being efficient. And these are all the things I noticed in recent years when I started exactly what you said with agile transformations, that I saw a lot of agile transformations in the beginning. That was the beginning of the research before AI, that those were done in waterfall fashion. So we saw teams, right? But there were some transformations that were just like going through certain steps. The cultural, behavioral change wasn't there. Now, what's interesting is that in your examples, the humans is still playing a role, right? We're talking about self-driving cars, but they're not fully self-driving. I include myself in that. Still needs a little bit of hand-holding, still needs a little reaction stuff, but there's a lot of support we're getting. And if you have experienced that kind of driving, it is very helpful in these tedious, long drives, etc. So there's a lot of things the AI can help us and make the routine tasks a little bit less tiring, if you want to see it this way. And that's where the Agile Kata came into the mix. It's like, how can we do, and that links us to the manifesto too, continuous improvement. How can we change with people, the cultural change on the team? Now, if you're having a team that has maybe AI support, there are still people there. There's still collaboration necessary. So how does this look like? And from a Kata's perspective, I described the Agile Kata. This was one of the questions that popped up in the background. What is this? It's a universal pattern, right? A word you used before, for continuous improvement of agility. And it always links back to what agility actually is based on the manifesto. And what I noticed was that in the Agile Kata, and I'm just going to run through this very quick. We have other webinars and videos on Agile Kata Pro that this can work to your advantage. It basically comes down to this very simple stepping sequence, if you want to see it. It's like you're looking for it first out into the distance, and you say, like, what is my challenge? What is the direction I would like to go to? What's my goal? And that is just in sync with scientific thinking. So the pattern of Kata in general, what Mike Walker came up in 2009, is really how do we change our thinking pattern, the neuroscience piece? How do we change our thinking pattern to more scientific thinking, toward evidence-based, towards that goal? And first, we need to understand, what is the goal? What is it we're trying to achieve? And you apply this to introducing AI to an organization. You can see this as doing an agile transformation. This could be improving your Scrum, like very micro on a team level. There's various levels you can use and utilize this kind of pattern. The first step back then in timeline is that we need to understand where we are and what is our current situation we are in. And only if we understand that, we have an understanding of how big is this gap, this potential gap. That challenge is obviously far out. Very hard to predict anything in that space. But what we can do is we can take a small step forward here. So this is a very small step, even though like visually it looks like we're going far out. It's not. It's a very small step. We're saying, like, what is a target condition? What is what we have ahead of us in a very short period of time? And then what's interesting is we're saying through a series of experimentation, and that goes very much in sync with what Jeff just said about Scrum, but also about Agile. We're doing some form of experimentation to get us there. And what in the background of that chart is that this is a bumpy road. And that is supposed to be a bumpy road because experiments fail and they succeed. I've worked with so many teams that are afraid of failed experiments, right? How does this look like? What's the culture around failed experiments? But only those get you closer and faster to your target condition. Now, with our topic of AI today, obviously the Agile Kata is a little bit more. And again, there are other videos and courses on you can find about Agile Kata on agilekata.pro, is that there are certain things around it. We're working in teams. We're working not alone. We're working with coaches. We're working with servant leadership. We're working towards measuring value and outcomes, not outputs. We work in ways that are inclusive to groups and collaboration. And all of those visuals in the background represent these kind of things. So we're having this pattern of how do we introduce change. That is, I would say, explaining this pattern as I just did in a few minutes is the easy part, right? The hard part is to really establish the thinking behind it, making these changes of how we approach problems. And problems could be anything, just what Jeff just mentioned, with Scrum related or transformation related. So here's what I basically looked at and said, okay, from an AI's perspective, where are the areas for AI support. And I was like, maybe the AI can help us with defining the direction and the challenge, make it better, right? Understand what the goals could be. And I had some really interesting interactions with ChatGPT in this particular case. We could, in this particular case, somebody could say we want to develop a product recommendation engine for an e-commerce platform. And then we said, well, look back, this is just a total random example here. And then we look back and says we have zero information about recommendations as of right now. And then we could say, why don't we enhance our product catalog, something very simple to allow for recommendations. And that would be in a target condition. So there is, and I think this brings the spirit back, and what I also experienced in that spirit from 2002 when I visited you and had my first Scrum training. That was the spirit of self-management and team, having a goal and going for it. And I feel like that translates very well to the target condition in this particular case. Now, what I really found out and what's really helpful, and these are the routine activities for Agile Kata folks, is the support in experimentation. Even though step 1, 2, and 3 are, if you want to look at this, are planning steps, right? It is, from a times perspective, this very short period of time. You're spending the biggest time of all 4 steps, hopefully, in step 4, which is the experimentation towards that target condition. And because of that allows for a tremendous amount of opportunities for AI support in that particular area. So here is something I created, and you can see my handwriting is awful. And I put this thing into ChatGPT. I took a picture of a board. I just scribbled something, and you can see my handwriting is bad. And I submitted that to ChatGPT, and I asked, what's the current situation here right now? How do you analyze this Agile Kata storyboard? And it was very interesting that there was 0 errors on interpreting my handwriting. There were some things missing on principles, like I put in principle of have fun in it. And obviously that's not an Agile principle, even though we like the idea of having fun, but just like to analyze these kind of things. So from a handwriting perspective, you can scribble things on a day-to-day basis, submit it to ChatGPT, and have some really interesting results. ChatGPT also did not pick up on some emotion that I didn't feel good that day and probably have to leave earlier. So there was no follow-up in that, but I think we all have a feeling on that. But other than that, it had the interpretation was great and the connections was great. Now there's also an experimenting record in the Kata world, where you see on the left side here the predictions and what is the evidence, what came out. So this is like the in between is the experiment and the evaluation on the other side. And what was interesting is when I took that experimenting record and I just wrote something down here as a step, but in this particular case, totally random again, unit test, and I put that through ChatGPT. Actually, this was very interesting is the request I had, can you analyze this Kata experimenting record and make suggestions for my next experiment? And that's when things got really interesting because there were suggestions on the next experiment. So I think that is a very tactical kind of thing, how ChatGPT can help even in helping with experimentation, analyzing, also transcribing these routine activities where you would be someone on a floor, in a hallway, in a coaching cycle, or whatever you are, and you're taking notes. All of those notes could be interpreted. And more importantly, there could be any kind of suggestions for me that could possibly motivate me to try another experiment. Now, because it's a chat, it follows that conversation and possibly can follow up on some of those outcomes. So when I feed that, if I would follow those things and then submit what happened to that experiment, I would expect some form of intelligent interaction. But even that is amazing, in my opinion, and a great support. So it's almost like an additional team member you have on your Kata team. So the coaching cycle, these are like the 5 questions we often see. I don't want to read them to you, but what was very interesting here is that when addressed these 5 original questions, I could start a coaching cycle with ChatGPT. So I actually started, okay, can we do a coaching cycle based on Agile Kata coaching cycle? And absolutely, here, let's go through the coaching cycle together. And it asked me those kind of questions. Now, these are the basic questions which we would like to see evolve over time, just in terms of continuous improvement. But we can have, even if you don't have a coach and you're trying to do continuous improvement, use AI to guide you through that kind of coaching experience. It was a little weird to interact with this machine rather than a human, but it does work. So even if you don't have a coach, you can do that. We don't have emotions being picked up. We can do a role play. Agile principles were not necessarily identified. We could probably feed that, what Jeff said, through books and material. Scanning is unbelievably great, but it did not feel like a companion yet. At least that was my experience here. So super quick here before I close out on my topic over here. What's interesting is the AI and agile teams, what actually the impact of AI and the trends we're seeing are actually in sync with what we're doing with Agile Kata. We see a smaller team size possibly, right? So Agile Kata could be somewhere 5 people plus AI support. Agile Kata does not know sprints, right? It does have iterations, but the iterations are, if you want to see it in this way, are flexible, right? They're not ongoing, they're not necessarily rhythmic. However, it might, and that is something we see in AI, it's like, how do we approach our goal, etc. So maybe we see shorter sprints, maybe there are no sprints, who knows? What it helped was a real focus on problems and challenges. And I feel like that is also very helpful in the work of Agile Kata and Agile in just in general. And then I do have to say what I think the opportunity for coaches and Scrum Masters alike is I think with AI, our focus might change a little bit more to professional coaching, empathy, less focus on teaching, more focus on coaching, and obviously also on the scientific thinking piece. We might make some adaptations to frameworks, to existing methodologies through that, and the Agile Kata starts an evolution of what's next, really learning continuously. But the last bullet point over here, the continuous learning, is also the opportunities. And one trend is, as Jeff said, it only knows what's being fed. Currently, it's the internet that it knows, or we are submitting a book. AI knows what's out there and is extremely fast and can make connections between things and suggest things. However, we need to focus on the learning piece. I think for the agile teams out there, I think it's the learning, the new learning, that will then feed and obviously motivate into future things. So we're shifting our focus away from executing certain routine activities and going more into the learning.